lot of reality shows out there. You guys have hit the jackpot with this one. People love your show. It's all about how you started a Duck Dynasty. It's all about a multi-million-dollar business you guys created.
The years after Duck Dynasty were marked by tragedy and controversies few fans ever saw coming. What began as a record-breaking reality show on Duck Dynasty eventually gave way to a series of events that changed the lives of the Robertson family forever. From the death of the family patriarch and a drive-by shooting at the Robertson estate to legal troubles, the story that unfolded after the cameras stopped rolling was far different from the one viewers watched on television. So which Duck Dynasty cast members died or faced serious legal jeopardy? And how did these events reshape one of reality TV's most successful families? Join us as we break down every Duck Dynasty cast member who has died or faced legal jeopardy as of 2026. Phil Robertson. Phil Robertson was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2024, roughly a year before he died. The family learned about it, processed it privately, and continued their lives around it the way families dealing with dementia diagnoses always do, without performing grief for an audience that had been watching them for over a decade. Phil had already been thinking about death long before the diagnosis arrived. On his son Jace's podcast in 2023, after back surgery, he said something that circulated everywhere after his death. Don't cry. Dance, sing, but don't cry when I die. He had thought it through. He had decided how he wanted to be remembered. He told his family what he wanted and trusted them to do it. The Alzheimer's diagnosis was specifically cruel for a man whose entire identity rested on the force and clarity of his mind. Phil Robertson had opinions about everything and delivered them with the absolute conviction of someone who had thought it all through and arrived at certainty. The disease that dismantles memory and personality was taking the most Phil Robertson things about Phil Robertson. The certainty, the forcefulness, the specific quality of his presence, one by one, before his body gave out. He died on May 25, 2025, at the age of 79. His daughter-in-law, Corey Robertson, announced the death on Instagram on behalf of the family. The statement quoted Paul, "You do not grieve like those who have no hope, for we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him." That was not a PR team's formulation. That was the Robertson family's actual theology, applied to the death of the man who gave it to them. Jace Robertson posted on X the same day, "My dad has gone to be with the Lord today. He will be missed, but we know he is in good hands. And our family is good because God is very good." Everything about that sentence, the past tense, the confidence, the pivot from grief to gratitude, is Phil Robertson's inheritance. He built that sentence into every person around him across 40 years, and when it mattered most, every one of them used it. To understand what the family lost, you have to understand what Phil actually was before Duck Dynasty made him famous. He was born in Vivian, Louisiana, in April 1946. He was talented enough at football to be the starting quarterback at Louisiana Tech, ahead of Terry Bradshaw, who became a 4-time Super Bowl champion. Phil chose hunting and fishing over professional sport, a choice that in hindsight seems inevitable, because the identity he eventually built was always going to be about the swamp and the woods and the duck call, not the stadium. He invented the Duck Commander duck call in 1972 because he believed the commercial calls on the market were inadequate, that they did not produce the sound that actually brought ducks in. He built a business around that one conviction out of a family home in West Monroe, Louisiana, and over 4 decades turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation. None of it was handed to him. none of it came from connections or industry access. It came from a man who knew something, built something around it, and refused to stop. The biographical film The Blind, released in September 2023, covered what the show had largely left in the background: the years of alcoholism and violence in the 1970s, before his Christian conversion in 1975, rebuilt everything. He has never tried to hide that period. He has described it publicly in his own words, across decades of interviews and his own book. The drinking, the abandonment, the behavior that was dismantling his family before faith changed the direction of it. The Robertson family's response to every difficult story in their world is downstream from that experience. They know what transformation looks like from the inside because they watched Phil live it. Duck Dynasty, the revival, premiered on A&E on June 1st, 2025, 1 week after his death. The show had been filmed with Phil's involvement during the months before he died. It premiered without him, the family on screen carrying the weight of a loss that was 1 week old when the audience sat down to watch. That timing was not planned by anyone. It was simply what happened. And the family handled it the only way they know how, by showing up. But if Phil Robertson's death was the loss that the Robertson family had been quietly preparing for, what happened on his estate 2 years earlier that nobody inside it had seen coming? John Luke and Mary Kate. The most violent chapter in the Duck Dynasty family's legal history did not involve any of the Robertsons themselves. It involved a young man named Daniel King Jr., a white Ford F-250 with large aftermarket tires and rims, and 8 to 10 gunshots fired at 2 homes on Willie Robertson's Louisiana property at night, while a baby was inside one of them. On April 24, 2020, multiple shots were fired from a vehicle at the Robertson estate in West Monroe, Louisiana. 2 homes were struck. 1 bullet passed through a bedroom window in the home where Willie's son, John Luke Robertson, was living with his wife, Mary Kate, and their newborn child. The bullet entered the room. Luckily, no one was physically injured. The Ouachita Parish Sheriff's Office confirmed that witnesses observed the shots being fired from a vehicle matching King's description. Daniel King Jr. was arrested and booked on 1 count of aggravated assault by drive-by shooting. He was described as being in his teens or early 20s. The Robertson family described themselves as pretty shook up. Coming from a family that projects calm faith as its fundamental operating mode, that description carried real weight. John Luke and Mary Kate Robertson, parents to a newborn, had found bullet holes in the house where they were sleeping with their child. The specific experience of that discovery is not something any Robertson had planned their post-television life around navigating. A protective order was issued by the court prohibiting King from coming within 1,000 feet of John Luke Robertson and his family, remaining in place until April 2022. King was also required to surrender all firearms he owned. The motive for the shooting was never clearly established in any public reporting that followed. What was clear was the vulnerability that celebrity creates for families who live publicly in relatively accessible places. The Robertson estate in West Monroe is known, identifiable, and located in a community where the family's prominence has been both an asset and a liability. The fame that brought economic activity and tourism to their region also made the property a target for whoever was driving that truck on a Friday night. John Luke and Mary Kate Robertson have continued building their family in the years since. They have more children. They appear in the revival. The bullet hole in the bedroom window is behind them in every practical sense. What it felt like to find it is another matter entirely. But the legal incident that made the most national headlines during the revival period was not the drive-by from 2020. It was something that happened on camera, to Willie himself, during the filming of the show. And that story is considerably more complicated than the headline version suggests. Willie Robertson. Willie Robertson did not go to jail. That needs to be said plainly before the rest of this segment is told, because the way this story circulated online made it sound considerably more consequential than what actually happened. The facts, which are documented and confirmed, are interesting on their own terms without any embellishment. During the filming of Duck Dynasty, the revival in 2025, Willie Robertson was confronted by law enforcement officers who warned him he could face jail time and a fine for a regulatory oversight connected to his property or business operations. It was confirmed that the confrontation was documented on camera in real time and became one of the revival's most discussed moments. There were also reports that Willie attempted to use his celebrity status during the conversation with officers in a way that some observers characterized as an attempt to influence the outcome. The word bribery appeared in some coverage. The specific nature of what was said and done in that conversation has been described differently depending on the source. Wide Open Country confirmed that Willie received a formal warning from police about potential jail time, which is different from being charged or arrested. He was not charged. He was not arrested. The situation resolved without legal consequences for Willie personally. What it generated was an episode of television that his audience found genuinely compelling and that reviewers noted as one of the revival's more human moments. The famous man discovering that his name does not automatically resolve the gap between what he is doing and what local law says he should be doing. Willie Robertson became the public face of the Robertson brand long before Duck Commander had television cameras in it. He was already building the operation when A&E arrived. He understood before anyone in the industry did that Phil's personality and the family's story had commercial significance that just needed the right vehicle. He is a businessman who became a television personality who is now managing a family brand in the first full year after his father's death. And the permit confrontation in the revival was a businessman's problem that happened to be filmed. He is running Duck Commander. He is appearing on the revival. He is the face of the Robertson enterprise in the era after Phil. That specific weight, carrying the family's public identity without the man who built it, is not something any law enforcement warning or regulatory oversight can add to. He is already carrying everything the situation requires. So what happened when someone who was genuinely inside the Robertson world did go to jail? And what did the family do about it when they found out? Brian Rucker. Brian Rucker was not a Robertson. He was a Duck Commander employee and recurring cast member who appeared across multiple seasons as part of the show's supporting world. One of the working people whose presence gave the show's workplace comedy much of its texture. He was genuinely well-liked by the family and by the audience, which is why what happened to him outside the cameras generated the response it did. In November 2023, the Duck Call Room podcast devoted an episode to his story, with Jace Robertson and other family members sitting across from Rucker himself as he described the arc of his life, from drugs and gangs to his arrest to what he described as a transformation rooted in faith. The Robertson family framed it as a redemption story. Rucker described it as the truth of what happened to him. The element of the story that generated the episode's central moment was Miss Kay. When Brian was in jail, Kay Robertson, Phil's wife, the family matriarch, the woman who had held the Robertson household together through the most difficult chapters of Phil's pre-conversion years, went to the jail where Brian was being held. She did not send a representative. She did not write a letter. She went. That response. Showing up at the jail, treating the arrest as the before chapter of a story that had not finished yet, refusing to cut off the person who had made choices that landed them in legal trouble, the most accurate illustration of how the Robertson family actually operates when someone in their circle falls. It is also the clearest possible expression of the theology that Phil Robertson built into every person around him across 50 years. The belief is literal. Transformation is real. You do not leave people in the before if you can show up and be part of the after. Brian is currently in good standing with the Robertson family and community. He told his story publicly, in his own words, on a platform the family controls and curates. The episode was not an act of charity or performance. It was the Robertson family doing what they have always done with difficult stories, telling them because they believe the telling is part of what makes the after possible. But of all the people in the Duck Dynasty world who understood that theology from the inside, none of them had lived it as completely as the man the show was built around. And the part of Phil Robertson's story that the show spent 11 seasons largely leaving in the background is the part that explains why every one of his children responded to his death the way they did. Phil Robertson's dark chapter. The Robertson family has chosen, deliberately and repeatedly, to tell the hardest story in their history. Not because they are confessional by nature, or because they are comfortable with exposure. Because the story of who Phil Robertson was before 1975 is the only thing that makes the story of who he became after 1975 mean anything. In the 1970s, Phil Robertson was an alcoholic who walked away from his family. He was violent in ways he has described publicly without minimizing. His wife Kay, who became Miss Kay of Duck Dynasty, the gentle and persistent center of the entire franchise, stayed through things that most people in her position would not have stayed through. She has described that decision in interviews across many years as rooted in faith and in the conviction that the man she had married was still somewhere inside everything that was happening to him. In 1975, Phil Robertson became a Christian. The conversion was not a gentle, gradual shift in perspective. By his own description, it was a rupture, a before and an after, separated by a specific encounter with faith that changed the direction of everything. He stopped drinking. He rebuilt his relationship with Kay. He rebuilt his relationships with his children. He invented the Duck Commander Duck Call. He built a business. He built the family that A&E eventually put cameras on, and that the country eventually invited into its living rooms for 11 seasons. The biographical film, The Blind, which premiered in September 2023, was built around the before period specifically. The Robertson family chose to make a film about the years the show had largely left in the background, not because the years were comfortable to revisit, but because they understood that a Phil Robertson story, without the darkness that preceded the conversion, is not a Phil Robertson story. It is a story about a nice man who made duck calls and had strong opinions. The real story is about what transformation costs and what it produces when it is real. This is the context in which everything else in the Duck Dynasty world makes sense. When Brian Rucker was arrested and Miss Kay went to the jail, she was going because she had watched her husband be retrieved from a worse place than that by something she believed was real. When the Robertson family's podcast response to every difficult story in their community involves sitting down with the person who is struggling and letting them tell it publicly, they are doing it because they watched Phil's before story become an after story across 5 decades of their own lives. When Phil died, and Jace Robertson posted that the family was good because God was very good, he was not performing comfort for an audience. He was using the language his father had given him, the same language Phil had used to describe his own conversion, his own recovery, his own rebuilding of everything he had destroyed in the years before 1975. The family is good because God is very good, is what Phil Robertson said about his own life every time he told it. His children are saying it about his death because he spent 50 years teaching them that this is the only sentence that covers everything. He told them not to cry. He said, "Dance, sing, but don't cry when I die." He had thought it through completely. He had decided who he was and what his death should mean to the people who loved him, and he told them while he still could. Which of these stories hit you hardest? And what does it say about the Robertson family that the darkest chapters of their history are always the ones they tell most publicly? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.